This presentation is in compliance with the subject of mathematics in the modern world. The two topics that I'm going to discuss is the Polya's strategy, then the inductive versus deductive reasoning. On the Polya's strategy, I have 5 slides that is composed of an overview, a flowchart representation, an application to simple problem, an application to mathematical problem, and an important note in using Polya's strategy. While on the inductive versus deductive reasoning part, I will be having 6 slides that is composed of an inductive reasoning definition, a deductive reasoning definition, a representation of both reasonings in a decision tree, and a representation in 2 pyramids, and an example of an inductive and deductive reasoning. And the last will be a summary of the 2 reasonings. On our first slide of the Polya strategy, a strategy is introduced by George Polya. That's why it was named as Polya's strategy. And this strategy is a famous 4-step process for problem solving, which is used all over to aid people in problem solving. This strategy is also known as an understand, plan, act, and check strategy. In this slide, we have a cycle representing the Polya's strategy 4 steps. The cycle begins with understand. In this part, we are going to understand the problem and analyze it in order to figure out what are we simply trying to find in that problem. Then followed by a plan. We are going to devise a plan that is compatible for that problem in order to apply a strategy that we are going to use. Then plan is followed by an act. In this part, we are going to act out the plan in that certain problem. And after acting out the plan that we devised on the previous step, we are going to check if it's correct. We are going to validate if the result that we have is compatible and satisfy the problem. In this slide, we are going to apply Polya's strategy to a simple life problem. And the problem that I encountered is that I only have 2 1,000 peso bill, but I have 3 gift receiver for the Christmas. By applying Polya's strategy, we have to understand the problem first. And that gives us on how can I distribute evenly the 2,000 pesos that I have to 3 persons. And with that problem, I arrive at a plan to divide the 2,000 pesos to 3, and if there's a remainder, I'll keep it for myself in order to divide the value evenly. Then we're going to act out the plan. We will going to divide the 2,000 pesos by 3, and that will give us 666 pesos with a remainder 2. Take note that the remainder 2 will be kept for myself, and the 666 pesos will be given to 3 persons. And for the checking part, we are going to multiply the 666 pesos by 3, and that will give us a 1,998 pesos. And we will going to add that remainder 2 that will give us a result of 2,000 pesos. With the use of Polya's strategy, we successfully distributed evenly the 2,000 pesos that we have to 3 gift receiver for the Christmas. Now we're down to our 4th slide, in which we are going to approach a mathematical problem using Polya's strategy. And the problem is, if 1,836 is being divided by a number, it should give us a result of the square root of 144. Now, what is the value of that number? In applying Polya's strategy, we have to understand the problem first. And by analyzing the problem, we found out that we are just going to simply look for the value that will satisfy the given equation. Then, we are going to devise a plan to find what we are looking for. As for our plan, we have to get the square root of 144 first and divide it with 1836. This time, we are going to act out the plan in which we are going to get the square root of 144 first. Square root of 144 is 12. In lieu with that, it will give us an equation which is 1836 divided by a number which is represented by an x is equal to 12. And since we are looking for x, it will give us a new equation which is 1836 divided by 12 is equal to x. And using a calculator, if we divide 1836 into 12, it will give us a result of 153. And that 153 is the value of the x or that number that we are looking for. For the checking part, we are going to divide 1836 into 153. It should be equal to the square root of 144. And by using a calculator, we can confirm that 153 satisfy the equation. With the use again of the Polya's strategy, we can say that we finally found out what value will satisfy the equation successfully. As for the last slide, we have here an important note in using Polya's strategy. We have to take note that there are lots of ways in using Polya's strategy, like using trial and error, calculations, using diagrams, using charts, and using tables in order to figure out what is the best solution for the problem. But always be careful with the plan that you devise because not all plans are compatible to every problem that you can encounter. Also, there is a lot of ways in solving a problem, and Polya's strategy is just one of them. And that will end up the discussion of Polya's strategy. It is as simple as it is and concise and brief, and I hope you understand it well. The inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Which one is better to use? And that's what we are going to find out in our discussion. Let's have first the definition of inductive reasoning before we find out which one is better to use among the two reasonings. Inductive reasoning are based on specific observations that will draw us into general conclusions. As simple as it is. Next, we have here the definition of deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning are based on logics and facts and a specific conclusion that follows a general theory. With the definitions that we had earlier, I know it's not enough in order for us to differentiate the two reasonings. That's why I'm going to view them in a decision tree. Let us have first the inductive part. Inductive reasoning can either result to a strong or weak argument. And in a strong argument, they can either have a cogent or uncogent, while in weak argument, they will only have uncogent. A cogent is wherein the argument must be valid and have true premises and true conclusion, while on the uncogent, all weak arguments are uncogent. Meanwhile, on the deductive reasoning, it could either be valid or invalid. And under valid, it could be either sound or unsound. And in invalid, it will only be unsound. In unsound, The arguments must be valid, have true premises, and true conclusion, while on the unsound, all invalid arguments are considered as unsound. Another representation of the two reasonings is the pyramid and inverted pyramid representation, wherein inductive reasoning is represented in an inverted pyramid. In the inverted pyramid, inductive reasoning begins with an observation, wherein a social phenomenon is observed, followed by a generalization wherein data are collected and trends are examined, followed by a paradigm wherein theory is developed. With this, we can say that inductive reasoning begins with a specific observation that being generalized in order to develop a theory. Meanwhile, on the deductive reasoning that is being represented by a pyramid, it begins with an observation wherein a social phenomenon is observed, followed by a prediction wherein theory is explained why it occurred, then the theory wherein theory is tested. With this, we can see the deductive reasoning has a strong basis, unlike an inductive wherein after having their definitions and representations, we will now have an example of them. And the first example that we have here is an inductive reasoning. As I've said earlier, the inductive reasoning begins with a specific observation and ends up in a general conclusion. The specific observation that we have here is that the Starbucks in Manila is earning high profits. The Starbucks in Cebu is one of the rising outstanding coffee shops. With that given the specific observation, we can arrive at the conclusion that if I built a Starbucks in Davao, it is sure to be a success. The conclusion was based on the specific observation that the Starbucks were being built in the cities of Manila, of Luzon, and Visayas. That's why we arrive at the conclusion that if we built a Starbucks in the city of Mindanao, it is sure to be a success because the established Starbucks in the cities of Luzon and Visayas is having also their success. As for the example of deductive reasoning, start at a general observation and will end up in a specific conclusion. General observation that we have is all vegetables are healthy. Ampalaya is a vegetable. And our specific conclusion for that general observation is, therefore, ampalaya is healthy. Since vegetables are being generalized as a healthy, and ampalaya is a vegetable, will give us a conclusion that ampalaya is healthy, even though it was not really stated that the ampalaya is healthy. But because of the general observations that we have here, we can arrive that ampalaya is really healthy. And that's how deductive reasoning works. For the summary and conclusion of the discussion of inductive versus deductive reasoning, it doesn't matter which is better in inductive and deductive as long as you use them in appropriate way. Just remember that inductive reasoning is simply generalizing a statement from a specific observation, while deductive reasoning is specifying statement from a general theory. And that will end up our discussion in inductive versus deductive. I hope that I didn't disappoint you with the conclusion that we arrive at. As for the references of my presentation, the links are attached here for giving credits to the following links. I hope that in this discussion, you understand well the two topics that I chose, which is the Polya's strategy and inductive versus deductive reasoning.